They didn't deny it. They didn't confirm it either. And somehow, that silence became louder than any headline. Because when two people who once mentioned each other effortlessly suddenly stop doing so altogether, fans notice. And when that silence stretches across interviews, red carpets, variety shows, and social media timelines, it stops feeling accidental. It starts to feel agreed upon. This is the story fans are piecing together now. Not from statements, not from press releases, but from what Dylan Wang and Shen Yue no longer say. For years, their names were linked so naturally that it felt impossible to talk about one without the other. Interviews were filled with laughter at shared memories. Hosts would tease, and neither would rush to shut it down. There was ease, familiarity, a sense that whatever they had, on screen or off, it was something warm, mutual, and unfinished. And then, quietly, it changed. The mentions stopped first, small enough that only devoted fans caught it. Dylan would answer questions about his growth, his new projects, his pressure as a leading man, and where a certain name once naturally fit into those stories, there was now a careful pause. Shen Yue asked about chemistry, about comfort on set, about past collaborations, would smile politely and redirect the conversation back to work. No tension, no bitterness, just distance. At first, fans told themselves it was normal. Careers evolve. People grow. Not every co-star remains part of your public narrative forever. But then came the patterns, the repetition, the consistency of omission. They attended the same industry events without acknowledging each other publicly. When interviewers tried to bring one up to the other, questions were rephrased or gently sidestepped. Social media interactions that once felt casual disappeared entirely. No likes, no comments, no public congratulations. And that's when the theory began to take shape. Not a breakup announcement, not a feud, but an unspoken agreement. Because in an industry where silence is rarely accidental, choosing not to say something can be the loudest strategy of all. Fans started asking why. Why now? Why the specific kind of quiet? And the answers they began to imagine were layered, complicated, and deeply human. Some believe it started with timing. As Dylan Wang's career surged into a new phase, bigger roles, heavier expectations, constant scrutiny, every word he spoke was weighed differently. Every smile analyzed. Every association magnified. Being casually linked to anyone suddenly carried consequences. Not emotional ones, perhaps, but professional ones. Shen Yue's path, meanwhile, was shifting in its own direction. Different genres, different audiences, a deliberate attempt to step out of old shadows and define herself beyond a single role or partnership. Being constantly pulled back into the same narrative may have started to feel limiting rather than flattering. So, what if the silence wasn't about distance between them, but about protection? Protection of individual identities. Protection of future projects. Protection of something personal that didn't need to be fed to the public. In entertainment culture, especially one driven by fandoms and viral speculation, even the smallest interaction can explode into weeks of headlines. A shared glance becomes proof. A casual compliment becomes confirmation. And once that machine starts moving, it rarely stops. Perhaps Dylan and Shen saw that coming. Perhaps they had already lived through it once and decided not to do it again. Fans often assume silence means something broke. But sometimes silence means something survived and chose to stay private. What makes this theory so compelling is not what happened between them, but how aligned their behavior appears to be. Neither has slipped up. Neither has contradicted the other. There's no accidental mention, no awkward correction, no defensive denial. That kind of consistency suggests communication, an understanding, an agreement that whatever they shared, whether friendship, affection, or something more, it would no longer belong to interviews or headlines. And that choice, ironically, made fans even more curious. Because people expect drama. They expect messiness. They expect explanations. When none come, imagination fills the gap. Every pause becomes intentional. Every silence becomes meaningful. Fans rewatch old clips now, not to prove something happened, but to understand when it changed. They analyze body language from later appearances. The way smiles linger just a second shorter. the way names are avoided without strain, the way professionalism never cracks. And what they see isn't hostility, it's restraint. There's something almost respectful about it. Two people who once shared something visible choosing not to rewrite it publicly or exploit it for relevance. In a world that rewards oversharing, that restraint feels rare. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. Some fans believe the silence hides unresolved feelings, that mentioning each other would be too revealing, too honest, that avoiding the topic is easier than pretending indifference. Others think industry advice played a role, management teams prioritizing clean narratives and market flexibility over emotional transparency. And then there are those who believe the agreement exists precisely because the bond still does. Because if there were nothing there, there would be nothing to protect. What's undeniable is that both Dylan Wang and Shen Yue have become more careful storytellers of their own lives. They shared just enough to remain relatable, but never enough to become vulnerable to speculation. Interviews are polished. Answers are measured. Personal boundaries are clearer than ever. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone has learned what it costs to be misunderstood. Fans often romanticize public affection, but those inside the industry understand how quickly public narratives can erase private truth. Once a story belongs to the audience, it no longer belongs to the people who lived it. Maybe Dylan and Shen decided they were done letting that happen. Maybe the agreement wasn't spoken aloud in dramatic fashion, but arrived quietly, naturally, through shared experience and mutual respect. A look exchanged during a conversation about boundaries. A simple understanding that some chapters don't need footnotes. And so they move forward, not cutting ties, not rewriting history, just choosing silence over spectacle. The irony is that this silence has created one of the most enduring conversations around them. Fans don't argue over what was said. They argue over what wasn't, over intentions, over meanings, over whether restraint is a sign of closure or preservation. And perhaps the answer is both. Because life doesn't always offer clean endings. Sometimes it offers quiet transitions. Relationships don't explode. They soften. They shift shape. They find new places to exist without needing validation. If Dylan Wang and Shen Yue truly made an unspoken agreement, it may not have been about hiding something scandalous. It may have been about honoring something real, without turning it into content. In an age where every emotion is expected to be monetized, choosing privacy can be an act of quiet rebellion, and so the silence continues. No, D,